their scores decrease. We wanted to see if there was any correlation there. And then we also wanted to find out if, at one point, did sleep actually cause the scores to stagnate and perhaps become detrimental as opposed to beneficial.
Our hypothesis for this study was that college students who did receive the recommended 7 to 8 hours of sleep would do better on the assessment that we gave them over those who only got 6 or less hours of sleep. We created a cognitive functions ability test assessment to be able to determine whether or not this occurred within the college community.
And so the significance of the study was we wanted to determine what was the optimum number of hours of sleep one should get each night in order to maintain their peak performance. And we wanted to educate the student body here at the Loudon campus of the Northern Virginia Community College of the beneficial facts of getting enough sleep each night and doing so regularly.
For our theoretical framework, we found that total sleep deprivation negatively affects an individual's filtering capabilities. This means that whenever there are other things going on around them, they're not able to decipher one thing from another. They can only hold on to small bits and pieces of information as it comes to them through whether audibly or visually. And in effect, it ends up making it so that their attention span, memory, and their problem-solving skills ends up being negatively affected.
So going over the literature before conducting the research, the experiment, the prior researchers found multiple health risks with not getting enough sleep. And the main ones were hypertension, congestive heart failure, stroke, diabetes, and possibly heart attack. And then from there, the common causes amongst the research were the medical causes were insomnia and sleep apnea, but then also there was a major issue amongst college students because of the course load that they have and also having to maintain a job while going to school. And there was some talk about certain family structures where there's infants or certain structures where there's only single parents, but it mostly focused on college students and the medical purposes. And also within the literature review, we found that the common prior experimental instruments that were used were also other ex post facto designs, quasi-experimental designs, direct observation studies, and just full-on experiments that included prior, during, and after analyzation of the subjects. And those all mostly incorporated instrumentation that analyzed the brain, how it worked chemically and physically with functional MRI, electroencephalography machines, and electromyography machines as well.
For the limitations of our study, we realized there were some before, but we also determined that there were several limitations after we were already in the process of completing our study. One is that participants might not provide accurate information. This could be the number of hours of sleep they got that night. They might think they got a certain amount, but between waking up in the middle of the evening or other things, they didn't get that full amount of sleep, or other information such as that. We also realized that some participants might not take the assessment seriously, therefore just whizzing through the assessment that we gave them, and so not providing an accurate information to us on how well they really could have done on this assessment. We also unfortunately did not have any equipment available to us while doing this research project, so we were not able to see how the brain was functioning during this time of sleep deprivation, so we could not tell if the brain was working harder or incapable of working harder during this time period. We also realized that individuals do have different capabilities in each of the 3 areas assessed, and so somebody who only got 2-3 hours of sleep one night could still potentially do better than somebody else who got the full hours of sleep solely based on the fact that they are more capable in one of these, if not all of these 3 areas assessed. And then finally, because we did not have a before and after assessment, we could not specifically tell this individual did do better or did do worse whenever on full hours full night of sleep compared to being sleep deprived.
So the delimitations for this study was that the study was conducted here on the Loudoun campus of the Northern Virginia Community College, and all the students had to be at least 18 years of age, and all the subjects received the exact same assessment. The only variation was that the assessment was conducted in various places throughout the campus, and each and every time, as many precautions as we could take to eliminate any external distractions, we did do so.
Right, so our methodology, we decided to use an ex post facto methodology design, and what this is it's quasi-experimental, and it compares two groups on a pre-existing independent variable. In this case, it was the number of hours of sleep that the individual, the test subject, got the night prior, and then it compares it to its effects on a single dependent variable, and in this case that was how well each individual did on the assessment that was provided to them.
And then that's just a graphical representation of what a ex post facto design methodology looks like there. So for the sampling design, we chose to use a simple stratified random sampling methodology to accumulate our data here amongst students in Northern Virginia Community College, because we wanted randomization amongst our sample, but we wanted to maintain some control, because we wanted to split the stratum into two strata, 25 males and 25 females. And simple stratified random sampling offered the best possibilities to do so.
Right, so for our data collection, we ended up creating a cognitive function abilities assessment. It had three different sections. One was memory, we had problem solving, and critical thinking thinking. And for that, we took from three different pre-existing tests. The memory portion was taken through a test that was created by Eric H. Chudler, PhD. He uses this test to check the memory of children as they develop. And then we had, for the problem solving, we decided to use practice SAT questions. And then finally, for our critical thinking portion, we took questions from a pre-existing critical thinking test that is used by the College of Forestry at Oregon State University Graduate School. And before we decided to have them fill out this assessment, we had them sign an informed consent form so that they understood what was expected of them and what exactly it is that we are doing through this assessment and the implications of it.
And so for the data analysis portion, we took the mean scores from each section of the assessment and compared them based on gender. And then we also used a t-test to determine if there is any significant difference between males and females. And then we also wanted to then find any correlation, so we used the correlation coefficient, there's the calculation there on the bottom, to determine if there wasn't.
And so for the first set of graphs, we have a representation of first the male assessment scores and then the female assessment scores, basing off, on the y-axis you can see the number of hours of sleep that were obtained by the individuals, and then x-axis was the average grade score of the in the three different categories. Unfortunately, if our hypothesis had been supported, you would see that people who got the less amount of sleep would not have done as well on the three different portions than those who got the recommended 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Unfortunately, as you can see by our graphs, you can tell that in some areas, people who got the less hours of sleep did tend to do better in some of the areas than those who got more hours of sleep, which is why it would have been best for us to have done a before and after study.
So in the graphical representation here on the left, that shows the average score separated by male and female on the x-axis, and it really just shows basically that males scored slightly better in each category than females. The graphic on the right here shows the average hours of sleep based off age. So number of hours of sleep are on the x-axis, age groups are on the y-axis. And what we get from this data here is that females tend to get a little bit more sleep than males over the sample population, but we don't get too much more information than that there.
For the first section of our assessment, we have the critical thinking portion. This right here is a graphical representation comparing males and females on how well they did on each of the tests. portion of the assessment. First, we found our p-value and we compared it to a value of 0.05. This means that when trying to find the p-value, we want it to be less than 0.05. That would make what we found to be very significant in our results. However, unfortunately, as you can see, our p-value was approximately 0.35, therefore meaning that the conclusion that we can come up with is very insignificant. Also, we did have a very high standard deviation of approximately 32.9, which is very high, and we would have rathered a much lower standard deviation. And then finally, whenever comparing males and females, trying to see if one gender was more affected by the sleep deprivation than the other, we decided to do a t-test, which ended up, the t-value was approximately 1.88 for this portion of the assessment, and that failed to failed to reject the null hypothesis, therefore showing that neither gender was more adversely affected by sleep deprivation than the other. And then after that, we ended up combining them all to try and see if there was any correlation between sleep deprivation and how well they did on this portion of the assessment. And first we had the graphical representation, but we needed definitive proof rather than just a graph. So what we did was we completed the mathematical equation in order to find R. R shows that if it is 0, then there is no correlation, and if it is 1, that means that there is proper correlation between the two variables. Unfortunately, first of all, though it is very low, there was a negative correlation, which is in fact the opposite of what we were shooting for. However, because R is so close to 0, it would be safe to conclude that there is hardly any to 0 correlation between the two variables.
So this is the same thing just for the problem scores, trying to show if there's any difference between male and females. And again, the p-value is 9.989, which is much higher than the this significant value of 0.05, which we were trying to aim for. Standard deviation is high, almost the same as in the critical thinking, nearly 32. And t-value 1.99 also again fails to reject the null hypothesis, which shows that that neither gender is affected negatively from sleep deprivation. And then moving on to trying to prove a correlation between sleep deprivation and problem-solving test assessment scores. Again, having an R so close to 0, it shows a little bit, but barely any to prove any correlation whatsoever, because it is so close to 0. Again, failing to prove our hypothesis.
The final portion of our assessment was to assess their memory of each of the different test subjects. Again, comparing first males to females. Again, unfortunately, our p-value was higher than 0.05, being 0.6. And so that ended up showing that our findings were fairly insignificant. Again, our standard deviation was approximately 31, which is very high, and again, we would have rathered a much lower standard deviation. And then finally, to determine whether one gender was more affected than the other, we decided to do another t-test. Again, t-value being 1.18. Unfortunately, it did show that neither gender was more adversely affected by the sleep deprivation than the other. Then whenever we decided to go on and test for correlation, once again, unfortunately, we found an R of 0.19, which again, unfortunately, because it is so close to 0, we cannot prove that there is any correlation between sleep deprivation and how well an individual would do on this assessment.
So for future research, some ways to reduce some skewed data would be to have a larger sample size. So the student body population at Northern Virginia Community College, Loudoun campus, is 11,000, which would have required us to have a sample size of 500. So changing the confidence interval from 4 to 14 allowed us to have a sample size of 50. But in doing so, it also made us more prone to error and not having an actual representation of the population here. So that would be one way to include, to improve that, but due to time and finances, we had to make it smaller. And like Desmond said earlier, before and after assessment would really have helped us to determine if at all there was any effect in the sleep deprivation period. And also, being undergraduate researchers, we weren't able to have access to the certain equipment that would allow us, to actually look at the brain, and that would definitely help in the future.
In conclusion, unfortunately, our findings did fail to support our original hypothesis, which was that students who got the recommended 7 to 8 hours of sleep would do better on the assessment than those who failed to achieve that much and only got 6 or less hours of sleep. We do highly recommend that this research be repeated in the future, taking into account the limitations that we discovered, as well as what we recommended previously on how to conclude or how to proceed with the next experiment to help make it so that the results more accurately describe the population. Thank you.
Thank you.